Mega churches, big enough to host a Taylor Swift concert. Besides the fact that parking at these things every Sunday must be horrendous, I just uncovered a few problems that I think you're gonna wanna know, especially if you live in the United States. Now, I know that not every church is a mega church, but there are a lot of mega churches that exist, and they don't have to pay taxes. No church in the United States actually has to pay taxes. Not the mega churches, not the regular sized churches, not even the small little chapels. They don't have to pay taxes. And that is because of the separation of church and state. But in order for you to be tax exempt in this country and prove that there is a separation of church and state, you have to prove that your organization provides a public good. We'll get back to that in a minute. Not only does this tax exempt status include federal taxes, but it also includes the property taxes of what area they are existing on. So if a church takes up an entire arena, that entire arena is not paid property tax on by that church. Like, no one pays property tax on it, it just exists without having to pay property tax. Like, let that sink in. Where does the money that this pastor makes in church actually go? This is Joel Osteen. If you've heard of him, he is pretty notorious as a pastor at megachurches in Houston, Texas. Well, a lot of it goes to his $14 million home in Houston. If you paid $14 million in LA, Chicago, New York, you might get something a lot smaller than this, but this is in Texas. So imagine how big this actually is when you're on the ground and not in a helicopter flying over. In fact, you're free to look it up on Google. Just type in pastors of megachurches homes, and you'll see a lot of 14, 15, $20 million homes that are all pastor owned. So how much of that church money is actually going to public good? What are they doing? Now, I'm sure that a lot of them have organizations, but in times of dire distress or in times of severe public need, what are the churches actually doing? Well, Joel Osteen, that owns this house, he was asked to help the city of Houston and the surrounding areas when they were going through one of the most horrendous hurricanes in the past 50 years. A lot of people died, and a lot of people lost their homes and their animals, and they asked if he would open up this arena for people to seek shelter from the Houston area. Yeah, he said no. He said no. Yeah. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Sarah Holcomb. I am an ex-Washington, D.C. reporter turned Chicago-based comedian, and I got out of the news because it's very corrupt. So I like to just talk about things on my channel, and if you like what you see so far, subscribe if you want to see more, and also like this video if you like the video. Anyways, let's keep going because it gets worse. It gets worse. Now, instead of talking about how big these pastors' houses are and asking really what they're doing for the community, which I think is very, very important. By the way, this is another pastor's home. Anyways, I think it's important to also point out that they're supposed to not talk politics in church. They're supposed to not endorse candidates in church because then there is no separation of church and state. They're now becoming a political mouthpiece to a large group of people, and it could be considered a rally without that particular candidate actually present. Therefore, they shouldn't be tax exempt because they're no longer a church and they're more of a political mouthpiece. Well, I think you're going to be really interested to know that something happened as of this past July that people didn't know about. I didn't even hear about until today. And that is that the IRS, as of July 7th, 2025, reversed decades of precedent saying churches and religious organizations can now talk about politics in church. They can endorse candidates, and that just goes to show you that there's no more separation of church and state anymore. They are now one. So why are they not being taxed? That's one question that I want answered. Number two, and we have to be very, very clear and very serious when we ask these questions. If churches have money enough for pastors to have this type of house, then that means they have a lot of money to endorse campaigns. We know that the people who reach the final stages of a campaign, especially a presidential one, have to be backed by millions and millions of dollars from donors. Why wouldn't a church endorse a candidate that they think is gonna do them good and give them lots of money. The fact is that they already are. It was just made legal to let pastors speak about politics to congregations of people, and it's just been made legal for churches to give their untaxed money to endorse candidates. Now, I'm not saying that this wasn't done before, but they had to be sneakier about it. Now they don't have to be sneaky at all. We're going to see some major changes in this country in regards of what kind of candidates we have, because it's not going to get better with this being legal. I hope you know that. A lot of people have been joking lately that the United States is turning into the Handmaid's Tale. And in the beginning of Handmaid's Tale, masked people were not identifying themselves, and they were able to kidnap American citizens and take them wherever without telling anyone anything. That's what's happening in the United States right now. Women are losing rights already. Bills are being introduced every day to do that to women, on top of trying to take away women's rights to vote. If more candidates are getting endorsed with millions and millions of dollars, and they're starting to win because they're endorsed by these untaxed churches, then that means that a lot more people will be in power who want to take away women's rights, who want to take away American rights in general, and can do whatever they want. And they've been endorsed completely by the church. If you don't know what the Heritage Foundation is, you should definitely research that. But just so you know, in a nutshell, the Heritage Foundation has been pulling the puppet strings of politicians and churches for the past 50 years. And the Heritage Foundation is supported by donors who are Christian. Major donations come from churches, untaxed churches, and they're given to the Heritage Foundation. And then the Heritage Foundation can in turn start endorsing candidates that represent what they want. It's an infiltration of the government from the inside by making laws not laws anymore. But let's take a look at what this dude says. Just so you know who we're getting this from, that is Edwin Meese. He is an American attorney, law professor, and author, and member of the Republican Party who served in Ronald Reagan's administration. Ronald Reagan is the whole reason why we have the housing crisis, the job crisis that we have. Well, pretty much every issue that we have in this country comes from Ronald Reagan, just so you know. But I digress. Let's see what Edwin has to say. Pastors can lead the way in motivating the faithful to wise stewardship of their citizenship responsibilities. Now let's dissect that real quick. He's basically saying it's the responsibility of Christians to change their society and prove that they are good citizens with responsibilities to the public. And that's regardless of what anybody else believes. He's saying that without a healthy culture in civil society, which, by the way, he is gearing this only to Christians, and their idea of a healthy culture in civil society is a lot different than a lot of people, and it's way stricter and way more religious, by the way. He says that Christians have a moral obligation to be faithful citizens. Patriotism and service to our nation are hallmarks of the Christian calling. I'm sorry, but patriotism and service to the nation isn't just Christian, it's American. I don't have to be Christian to have patriotism and service to my nation, and neither do any of our military service members. However, the way that this is being worded makes it sound like it is only the Christians that have that duty, and that they're the only ones that are going to be doing it right. It is this type of, let's face it, fanaticism and the verbiage that is causing people to be moved to give money to the untaxed churches, which then endorse the candidates that they feel are going to represent them the best. Therefore, in a very short amount of time, in just a few elections, they are going to be the ones who are controlling the entire government. So yes, the people who were joking that this might turn into Handmaid's Tale might be not too far off. This article came out in 2021 in the Texas Tribune. Churches are breaking the law and endorsing in elections. The IRS looks the other way. So the IRS was looking the other way, but now they're not, because they just made it legal for this to happen only 4 years after this article came out in the Texas Tribune, meaning that it's now legal for churches to endorse elections. Now remember that churches are only tax exempt because they are helping out the greater good of society and the public at large. But are they? He didn't. If churches in the United States were forced to pay taxes, that would be an extra $71 billion per year that we would be getting from those churches. $71 billion that are being untaxed right now from these churches that have now proved they have no separation of church and state. It would only take $25 billion a year to end hunger in the United States. So why aren't the churches being taxed and doing what Jesus would do? Ending hunger, instead of endorsing candidates so they can have more control over a country politically. That doesn't sound very Jesus-like to me. That actually sounds pretty anti-Christ. You know? Now look, I'm not here to endorse Christianity or to speak down on Christianity. I'm not stating my political or religious affiliation. I'm only pointing out facts. And the facts are that if churches were taxed, they would be taxed $71 billion a year. And that would end all of the hunger in America. And they'd still have like 45 billion left over. All of the hunger in America and still have 45 billion left over? Let that sink in, guys. It's the fact that these pastors are living large and not doing their Christian duty of actually helping people and being a good Christian. Instead, what they're doing is preaching to a congregation that so wants to enter the kingdom of heaven, that so wants to believe in something higher than themselves, that so is sincere enough to listen to this talking person who, let's face it, is just a person. And then that person goes on to say that God spoke to him and wants a specific candidate to win. I got a mayor that God wants to unseat. God wants to undo. God wants to shift the balance of power in our city. And I have the jurisdiction over that this morning. This is not just a Christian power. This is not just a Christian pastor. This is someone who thinks he has jurisdiction in the government already because of the influence he has over the people and the power he has from their money. This is a big problem that's not being talked about. And that problem is the churches and the pastors within them. He's literally telling this congregation that is so sincere and believes in him that he got a revelation from God to get certain people in seats and out of seats in politics. This is an incredibly dangerous game, a dangerous situation, a real situation that no one is talking about. Tax the churches. Tax the churches. Tax the churches. Have them put their money where their mouth is and actually do the works of Jesus Christ if they claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, instead of actively being anti-Christ. Is that too much to ask? Let me know what you think about this in the comments and share this with as many people as you possibly can, because once again, no one's talking about this. And I don't know why. It seems like it's an inside job and no one really wants us to talk about it. You know what I mean? Considering the fact that the IRS was silent about it and that the IRS just allowed this to happen legally means that whoever is behind the powers that be in our high up government is probably doing stuff behind the scenes and working to make this happen for a reason. Probably to control us. This is not going to end well, guys. Anyways, like this video, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye.